me? Yeah? Okay, cool. Hi, so I'm Tiago. I'm a JavaScript developer at Contentful. And yeah, I'm here today to talk to you about Flux implementations. Yeah.
What?
Okay, well, I shouldn't touch
It's
right. Sorry?
It's right.
Oh, yeah. So first of all, a couple of warnings. This talk is very opinionated in the sense that this is an analysis of different frameworks, essentially. So a lot of it is more my opinion, something that I don't like, other people might prefer for whatever reasons. Also, there's not a lot of code, but two of the code examples have ES6, so if you're not familiar with that, well, you should be. So, who here has a good idea of what Flux is, or has used Flux before? Okay, so, two people. Okay, so I'll try to do a bit of an explanation of what Flux is first. I'm actually expecting the other speaker who should be the first to also do that, but I'm the first, so I have to do it. So yeah, Flux essentially is it's not exactly a framework, it's more of a set of patterns for dealing with data and creating an application architecture. I guess you can call that a framework. It promotes this one-way data flow, which I'll explain there a bit further. But also, what is usually known as Flux is just a concept. It's not really, there's like not one framework called Flux. Even though Facebook had a project that they named Flux, but that's just one part of the full Flux implementation, which I'll show how. So what are the main components of this idea? So we have the views, which are essentially React components. You have the stores, which are pretty much just JavaScript objects that store data. You have the actions, and you have the dispatcher, which, as I said before, Facebook has released an implementation of this dispatcher. And a lot of the frameworks that I will talk about ahead use the actual dispatcher from Facebook in their implementations. I'm not entirely sure which ones right now. I know two that really don't, but I think most of the other ones do use that. But we know that. So yeah, first of all, what is this dispatcher? This dispatcher is usually a singleton. And all it does is listen to actions, which essentially are events, and register callbacks, which can respond to those actions. And those callbacks will have to look at an action, look at the type of an action, and decide if they want to handle that action or not. So usually you don't listen to one specific event, you just listen to actions in general, and you have to look at all the actions and see if you should handle them or not. Some of the frameworks, some of the implementations make you do this, others don't. They give you some better patterns to do this. And I'll explain a bit more how, and usually you don't, depending on the implementations, you have to go with the dispatcher directly or not. So yeah, the views. As I said before, they're React.js views or view controllers or just controllers. This is actually kind of part of a bit of some other patterns that have been kind of showing up in the React world, where sometimes you have views that deal with showing something and preparing the state for whatever you're showing. Some people are starting to do this kind of controller views, which essentially just deal with preparing state, and then they pass it down by properties to other views, which just display it. So, yeah, that's maybe a whole other talk. So yeah, the views usually get data from stores. They only get data from stores, as in they don't send data to the stores. The way what they do, and with that data, they usually set their view state, or they pass it down to other components. And the way they can make changes to data in your application outside of the component is firing actions with metadata, which relates to those actions. So I'll show a bit of an example of this for ahead. Then we have the stores. And I guess the stores are the part here that, at least for me and from what I see from a lot of other people, especially on online communities, a lot of people don't understand them initially very well because they're so generic. So essentially stores manage both data that you can get from the server or from the user or whatever, and they also manage application state. There's actually some of the Flux implementations say that you should only manage data. If you look at the original concept from Facebook, they say they do manage data and state. I guess in the end that's also a bit of a preference. Some people just manage state with views and view controllers. Yeah, the patterns there are still a bit fuzzy for some use cases, I guess. Also, they're not, these data stores are not exactly models, as in if you think, for instance, as backbone models. A store is not, it can behave as a model, but it doesn't mean that it is exactly a model. And one store can manage or contain multiple models or multiple instances of the model, which is also not exactly like a backbone collection, it's something a bit more abstract. Generally, the thing that should be kind of strict about stores is that they should consider only one domain of data in your application. So, I don't know, the usual example, a to-do app, you'll probably have a to-do store for to-dos. If you have user settings, then you'll probably have a store for user settings, and so on. So yeah, the general idea is that you shouldn't mix up really different kinds of things in one store. So yeah, the way stores work with the rest of Flux implementation is that they can listen to existing actions, and then listening to those actions through the dispatcher, they decide if this should mutate their own data or not. And when they do change that data, they fire an event. Usually, in most implementation stores, descend from, they extend an event emitter, and then they just fire a change event saying like, hey, my data has changed. So everyone who wants, all the components who want can subscribe to that event. And this last thing is a thing that kind of differs a bit between implementations, but in the original implementation, the way stores can kind of talk to each other, because you probably have a store which depends on data from some other store, there's this wait for method, which stores can use to kind of listen to each other. But some of the implementations actually do away with this and do things in a bit more simple way, at least in my opinion. So this is a bit of an example of what the store would be, where you would have kind of a singleton, which just stores some to-dos. You have some getter methods, and then you have a method, and this is going to continue for. You have a method which makes change events, and you have a method which thinks that. So essentially, a view, what it could do with this store is that it could use these getter methods to get data, and then if it wants to know when the data changes, it could call this method with a callback to be notified when the data changes. And the store would have to then emit change events saying like, hey, my data's changed, like go do whatever with it. So also, this is also something that would be somehow part of the store, which is where you use a dispatcher to register the action listeners. So you have to listen, the dispatcher listens to all the actions that are fired, looks at the action type, and if it's something that it cares about, it does something. So in this case, if you're creating it to do, and this usually comes with metadata also on the action object, you would just put that in your internal storage and you make the change event. This is also something that I don't mention a lot further up, I think, with constants, but it's also something that in some implementations you usually create like a list of constants separately, and then you should never really refer to actions by strings. You always use those constants. This is kind of cool for some implementations because of the way that you can then hook up actions to views. I also don't have a good example of that, but also not all the implementations make use of this. And yeah, actions, which I already talked about quite a bit. Actions are kind of the most simple thing, why didn't this change? Okay, cool. So yeah, actions are, actions are simple helper methods, and all they do is they trigger events to dispatch with metadata. So say if you have a to-do store, you do, let me just sorry about that. Okay, well, whatever, I'll do it like this. So yeah, this is an example of an action, and actions are essentially simple methods which you can call with whatever data that you're changing, and what they will do is that they will dispatch events for whatever stores that might be listening to them. It doesn't care, it just fires them to the dispatcher with an action name and with the metadata. So that's essentially advertising to this store and to have other stores also listening to those actions. So yeah, those are kind of the base concepts, the basic blocks. And this is the data flow that usually occurs in an app. So the reason why I usually say that this is a one-way data flow is because you have your views fire actions into the dispatcher. Also, those actions there, they can be actions that come from other stores or other parts, or even other components that you have, which are not exactly part of the Flux architecture. Essentially, every time you want to change data in your stores, you will not do it in the store directly. You'll just fire actions, and those actions can come from anywhere. And all of those actions going to the dispatcher, the store listens to the actions, so the data flows into the store, and then the store fires change events, which the views can listen to. And yeah, that's pretty much the basic data flow. So yeah, I have some hints. So now talking about the Flux implementations, I made this tweet yesterday, and there's this bot which always tweets this kind of random things. Yeah, like there's at least 11 Flux implementations that I have here, and at least 4 or 5 of them, because Flux is kind of like from the Flux capacitor and Back to the Future, at least 4 or 5, I'm not even sure, are like puns on Back to the Future references. So yeah, so I kind of group them in this kind of, I kind of created these kinds of groups, and I started thinking they don't make that much sense after I finished the talk. But anyway, the reason why I say this is that there are implementations which they basically look at the basic Flux concept and implement it. Some of them do that, and they add a bunch of stuff, a bunch of things on top, which are the ones I kind of call frameworks because they're more like full-fledged frameworks. And then you have the reactive implementations, which kind of take some ideas from functional reactive programming and adapt the Flux concept using that. So yeah, I'll just go through all of them and say a few points about each of them. Also, I lost my count if I'm going way too over time. Let me know. So yeah, Fluxer seems to be, I think it was one of the first ones I saw. It's a fairly simple implementation in the concept that it's very close to the core Flux idea. It provides you with some watcher mixins. I actually forgot to include an example for this. But if you know about React mixins, they're essentially mixins that you can add to your React components. Because traditionally what you have to do if you're using Flux is that on your component git mount, you need to like declare the event listener to the data store, so you can say, hey, when the data store changes, update my state. And most of these implementations have mixins that just set up that boilerplate for you, so you don't need to always write that. Also, Fluxer tends to be a bit verbose in the way you write most of the code. So if you thought some of the things behind the constants and whatever were verbose, I think Fluxer is even a bit more. It also, as a bunch of these other implementations, it does one thing that I don't really like. That one of the ways you can use it, and I think the case of Fluxer is actually the way you have to use it, is that you always pass down this reference to your React component. So every time you want to call an action or anything, you always have to do something like this.flux.create action, whatever. Some of them let you do that, or they also allow you to just create stores or actions as objects and require them with your model system. I think Fluxer is kind of strict in that sense. We have Flux, which is, let me just, so I have them all here. Yes. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, Flux is also kind of similar to Fluxer, but in general it's a bit more simple. You have watcher mixins and components, which is the reason for this is that mixins are actually something in React that's going away at some point. Because since React 0.13, you can declare your React components as ES6 classes. And those, if you do that, you cannot use mixins. They just don't support the mixin syntax there. And they don't want to support it for the future. They don't have like a final replacement or solution yet, but what most people are doing so far is that they're doing wrapper components, which then provide functionality to their child components. And Flux is one of the implementations that already gives you that. So you can use either the mixin or the component. But in general, components should be the future. Alt is also kind of similar. It gives you a few more things, like the lifecycle methods. So the same way you have the lifecycle methods in React components. The same way you have lifecycle methods in React components. This implementation also gives you the same thing for your data stores. So you know, I don't remember exactly what it will look like. So the listeners. So yeah, you have. Oh yeah, this is another thing. Some of the lifecycle methods also hook into this bootstrap and snapshot mechanism, which what you can do is, so if your React application is also supposed to run on the server, this is really useful because you can kind of boost a snapshot. You can take a snapshot of your data or on either the client or the server, and then send it to the other side and bootstrap the whole application with that set of data, so essentially the same state of all the stores. And some of these lifecycle methods just allow you to hook up into that. Serialization is also part of that. You can roll back the data. Anyway. Yeah, so Fly, this is also one of the puns. on backing feature. Yeah, it's also, this one is really hard for me to tell because the documentation is very small, but as far as I can tell, it's just a very straightforward implementation of Flux. There's not, apart from the mixins, there's not much that is different. And it's also very similar to the previous ones that I've showed so far. Fluxy. Fluxy is, again, these first 5 or 6 are almost similar. There's not a lot of differences between them. The thing that Fluxy also does is that it bundles Mori, which is a library for immutable data, which is also using OM. And it also provides these lifecycle methods. So, yeah, depending on whether you want to deal with immutable data or not, that's something you might want to consider. I don't think you can use it without it. Then we have DeLorean, which is also very close to the core concept, but they also, one thing that is interesting about it is that they've written it in a way that you can use it with things other than React. So they have examples of using this with Flight.js, which is a framework from Twitter, and with Reactive, which is a framework from The Guardian. So you can kind of use the Flux architecture in something that is not React. But apart from that, it's a very straightforward Flux implementation. Now we can get into the more, slightly more complex ones. So Marty, in general, is very similar to the previous ones, but they give you a few more things. They also give you data fetching helpers, because this is a thing that I don't think I made clear before about the stores, but the stores in themselves should not be concerned with how you persist data to the server or to local storage or any of that. That is something that you can add to your storage, but it's not really part of the store concept. Marty gives you some helpers to deal with that. So they give you some, what do they call it? State sources. Yeah, so essentially they're like sources for your application state. So they give you some helpers, like an implementation of a few other things, so that you can persist your data and retrieve it. And we also have really good documentation. It's a bit more of a complex framework. Their way of declaring something is also a bit more verbose and not as pretty, but the documentation in general is really good. Tuxedo is also more of a framework. The core implementation is very similar. It's more similar to Fluxor, also in the sense that you have like this Flux or whatever, which is kind of annoying. They also give you other things like animation helpers, which I don't really understand why. They bundle a router, they give you some component helpers as well, and they also have good documentation. But yeah, it's more of a larger thing, so might not be what everyone wants. Flexible, this is actually from Yahoo. It's kind of similar to Alt in a certain way. They're also very focused on the shared client server usage. I think they have a similar thing with the lifecycle methods and the snapshots for the data. They also make use of something which I learned about a few days ago, which apparently exists in React, but it's not really documented, and I think it's going to become like official as part of the next version of React, which is called contexts, which is like a nicer way to pass data down to the child components, but they already make you have use of this. They also have a plugin system, which I think will understand exactly what they're using for. So yeah, this one has like a larger URL. It's called Nexus Flux. The API is much more simpler than most of the other ones we've seen before. They also have a big focus on client-server usage, and even give you like a bunch of different data transports. Like you can hook up WebSockets directly to the user, and a few other things. Then, okay, now disclaimer: the next two are my two favorite implementations, so I might talk more about them. So Reflux is inspired by functional reactive programming. They kind of do away with the whole dispatcher idea, and all the stores and actions are just things that you can listen to. So in the end, the code you write tends to be much more simple and I guess easier to understand. And we can understand much easier than most of the other ones. The API is also pretty small. It's not really hard to get into it and use it. They also have helper mixins, and I was actually talking to the creator today on this online React community, and we should have components soon at some point as well. Because people were actually asking me like, oh, when are you getting components? And he wasn't really understanding what people were talking about. But yeah, apparently now it has a path to do that soon. So it should catch up with the other ones. And then we have RX Flux, which, does anyone know what RxJS is? Yeah, cool. So RxJS is this set of, it's called React extensions, right? Yeah. It's this set of reactive programming helpers from Microsoft. And they give you a bunch of primitives and tools to do reactive programming. And what RX Flux is that they implement the actions as the stores using the observable component from RxJS at its core. So in the end, the way you use it is very similar to Reflux. And the API is also like very small. It also doesn't seem to have a lot of documentation, so I'm still not sure if it's something that like doing very many things or is very active. But yeah, so I'm pretty much done. I don't know if anyone has any questions about any of these implementations or something more specific. Also because I have all the links here open, so I can probably find a few more things. Oh yeah, I also have a few resources here. The first one is the official Flux website. The second one is a blog post which doesn't cover all these frameworks, but it's actually a pretty good blog post comparing some of the Flux implementations. Those other two links, Awesome React, is just like a collection of a lot of links, resources about React. React Primer is, right now, it's kind of a draft for a book, which is also starting to look really good. And the last thing is the Slack community about React and Flux, which is pretty active. A bunch of the people who write like these frameworks are there as well, so right now it's a very interesting community. So yeah, if anyone has any questions. Yeah. No, not in production. I've done a few demo projects. I'm currently working on one that I hope becomes a bit bigger, which is going to be good to like figure out if kind of how these things work. But essentially, I'm using Reflux because so far it's my favorite. Some of the other ones that do more things are things that I don't really need or care for. And I think in general, the code that I already have is looking like very straightforward and very simple. I can probably yeah. It's like a demo that I do recently. And yeah, the actions are like just declaring. Yeah, there's not much to them. They're essentially like when you do that, you just create these objects that emit events, and that then you can call or listen to. It's very straightforward. And the stores, I'm actually making a bad use of the stores here. I haven't changed yet since I wrote the stores, because initially I didn't really understand how to use the stores here very well. But also you can listen to actions and then we have methods which handle those actions. Oh, yeah, sorry. So yeah, you can just get like all the actions or stores. You just require them as modules. Whereas on some of the other implementations, you have to kind of access them. You kind of have to inject your Flux instance there. Some of them will actually do both ways. And then where's the yeah, then you just have like this kind of mix-ins where you say like, oh, you're just going to listen to this store, and when that store emits a change event, it already knows how to listen to it, to update its own state, which whatever comes from that. So it's just going to do a call like this set state, whatever, with the data that is emitted from that store. So yeah, that's probably not like very helpful. And yeah, the way you can call actions is just like very simple. You can do location actions, or you can just, I don't know if I have an example somewhere, you can just listen to this as well and say, when you do something, you can update. Yeah, I'm actually using, it's probably not as simple to straightforward, because I'm actually using a bunch of helpers that they have. That's good, I guess. Okay, I don't know where they are, but they have a bunch of helpers that you can use in your stores and your actions to just help you, because a lot of this code of like listening to stores and listening to actions ends up being just a lot of boilerplate. It's always the same thing. So yeah.
I find pipeline infections in your Flux, and very easily have an idea to implement the server. So in some approaches so
yeah,
they protect that something happens and like basic promises or like things we help to output that thing is some action or successful. So can you try this approach?
I'm kind of doing something like that in my other project, which I don't have here right now, but I mean, essentially the way you listen to data is like not very well defined in the structure. You can kind of do it in the stores or outside the stores. The whole idea is that, I mean, in this case, if you're doing it inside of the store, as here, I'm just using like our Contentful library to do that. You can just do it in the store and then trigger events when the data changes. And you can have stores listening to other stores, which in the case of Reflux, it's like much simpler because you don't need to use like the wait for thing. You can just have a store object and say, listen to this store. So then you can somehow chain stores to each other if necessary. In most of the area implementations, you have to use the wait for thing, which is a bit more complex. But I think usually the wait for implementation can also take time.
Yeah, exactly. But the base for some reason spike into subtext and
okay.
And currently I can't really like. So what we're doing? I actually asked.
This is on Reflux?
Yeah, exactly. So
okay. I haven't seen that. Oh, maybe I bypass that part in there.
Yeah, and then like have you tried Eric's Flux? So it was kind of pro, but
Eric's Flux?
Yeah.
No, I haven't tried it yet.
Okay.
It looks interesting. It looks very similar to Reflux, but I haven't really used it.
Okay, because Reflux is not really.
So, is that really what's it?
It's not really React.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, but I also like it more. So.
Yeah, nice. I think that's all the time we have.
One question. So I don't know, maybe you've read about the announcement of Facebook that they're planning to do these relay as a framework with
yeah,
ML.
but that's a very different thing.
Is it?
Yeah, it's not related to Flux at all. It's actually a very different thing.
Okay, it's not going to replace Flux.
No. I would say it's more for different use cases, where I cannot really explain you how. There is like a list somewhere which one of the guys wrote, which is gigantic, and we talked a lot about it. But it's a different thing.